After a grueling journey, the settlers and their fearless leader, the Rough Rider, braved the Atlantic storms in search of one goal: to build a civilization that would stand the test of time. Their capital outpost was just the beginning, as American explorers were sent out to map the eastern seaboard. But much to their dismay, they found more than just hills and forests. This realization made things difficult, as these primitive tribes also sought to expand their own holdings in the north and south. And so the explorers moved into the one direction where there was no civilization. In their way stood the uncivilized barbarians holding the gate to the west. Despite their brave leader leading the charge, the dug-in defenders held firm. The colonists could not afford to get bogged down in guerrilla warfare, and so set a trap that allowed our forces to raise their camp. The West now lay wide open, with rich, natural wonders that would provide all the yields we would ever need. This spot was perfect to build a great empire, one that wouldn't be American. The settlers' plan of peaceful colonization was shattered. While the four nations had lived in peace up to this point, the era of continental struggle had begun, and would only end when one nation claimed total victory. Everyone began racing out settlers to claim as much territory as they could. In their colonial frenzy, the colonists ignored defense, the economy, and all semblance of state building. But it would still be Canada who would draw first blood by settling Quebec, not far from the American capital. Any further and western expansion would be blocked. So Philadelphia was founded to secure expansion routes and trap the Canadians in a northern prison. With Canada beaten, that left only two competitors to worry about, both of which began encroaching on American territory. Not one to be outmatched, the Rough Rider ensured that the key city of New York would secure the East Coast for the settlers, a costly mistake that would come to haunt the settlers. But unlike the others, the Aztecs played a different game, slowing settler production in favor of building a powerful military. With the army mere turns away from New York, America stood defenseless against their advance. Facing defeat, the colonies forged a last-ditch treaty and were stunned when Montezuma agreed. This treaty prevented the Aztecs from attacking American lands or seizing any cities. But that deal goes both ways, which was when Montezuma sprung his trap. The Rough Rider was outplayed. America's westward expansion was crushed. While the Korean Aztecs battled for the center, the Rough Rider was boxed in as his options were running dry. There's only one thing he can do at this point. If they couldn't grow wide, then they would grow tall. The founding of New Orleans marked the dawn of a new era of development. The nation launched an industrial scheme. Plantations with their dubious business practices became the backbone of America's trade empire. Growth surged across all four cities, fueling the empire's rise. These new citizens needed work, which the plentiful builders provided. Soon enough, the four American cities would widely become known as the four greatest cities of the New World. In this period of inward development, the only notable diplomatic exchange was the meeting of the Mayan leader, Lady Thick-Thighs. Her advanced civilization was a harsh reminder of reality. Even while focusing on economic growth, the entire empire as a whole was falling behind. Their cities' quality couldn't compete with the Cree and Aztecs' sprawling numbers. And the Aztecs specifically had grown to become the strongest power of the New World. To challenge their rivals, America needed a miracle. It was under this intense pressure that Rough Rider Teddy realized his fatal mistake. Ignoring military growth had left the nation defenseless against a deadly enemy, and Lady Six Sky was about to take advantage. America was still far too weak to end this war on their own terms. They needed to be smart, be creative, and above all else, take no risks. The Mayans expected us to roll over and accept our fate, so their first wave of conscripts was beaten back with not a single soldier making it to shore. Annoyed but undeterred, Lady Thick-Thighs still had her main force ready to go. These better equipped, veteran units made preventing a beachhead impossible. Then, the miracle arrived. The natives were wealthy, but they were also decentralized, with only theoretical control of their frontiers. And nearby American super cities would soon put that theory to the test. The massive population drove increasing migration into native lands. As they grew in number, the new settlers caused loyalty to the crown of Montezuma to waver. This was bad news for the Aztec emperor, who had to act fast. He couldn't attack America directly, so he did what any leader does when domestic control slips: redirect his people's hate to a foreign nation. And so, for the first time ever, the two American giants were locked in conflict. This was good news for America, but they couldn't exploit it. They still had their own invasion to repel. Despite the Mayans' superior weaponry, the veteran archers held firm, and the Second Battle of New Orleans ended just as the first. But this was different than last time, as the bulk of Mayan forces lay at the bottom of the ocean. Still, Lady Six Sky refused to be humiliated. Despite this, the Americans bought crucial breathing room before the final showdown. This was only the beginning of their lucky streak, as the war-ravaged Cree frontier hit a tipping point and rebelled, seeking to join their prosperous brethren. A major win for America, but this was only the beginning. Unfortunately, the Midwest Uprising painted a target on America's back. To survive, they had to evolve or be erased. However, that wouldn't be ready in time, as the third and final assault from Lady Thick-Thighs was already underway. Frustrated by her failed naval invasions, she exploited rising tensions between East and West to cut a deal with Montezuma. In exchange for troop access to New York's doorstep, she promised to deal with the pesky Americans on his behalf. Thankfully, the Aztecs could not partake. At least not directly. The Cree's hit-and-run tactics were wreaking havoc on the Aztec economy. This economic collapse was the final straw for Kempwala, who declared their independence. The newly freed city caught the eye of Mayan generals, desperate for a base outside Aztec control. Fearing for their safety, the rebels joined forces with the Americans to face the Mayan threat. Armed with Aztec military technology and American cunning, the final Mayan assault was crushed. Lady Six Sky retreated and would never again threaten the American heartland. The moment was not lost on the public. With more cities and stronger units, America was now a power to be respected, if not feared. Not everyone was happy at this turn of events, least of all the terrified Canadians. With the threat of their more powerful southern neighbor, they struck a deal with Poundmaker. A Cree settler would move toward Canadian territory, where loyalty pressure would eventually cause the city to flip to the Northmen, giving them just enough cities to counter the southern colonists. This was a risk the Rough Rider could not afford to take, as a northern alliance and ensuing diplomatic isolation would destroy what he worked so hard to achieve. And so a turning point was reached, a gamble taken, and the die was cast. Advancements in technology were bearing fruit as American factories began roaring to life. Muskets and cannons poured out in droves, though none had yet been battle-tested. Not all was going well, as the Cree tactics that devastated the Aztecs were now ravaging America's economy. The raids themselves were mere distractions from the main Cree army gathering to reclaim lost ground. With limited forces in the area, it was up to this lone musketman to hold the river line and save the city. In their first true test, the muskets delivered. The line held, and reinforcements surged in from behind, forming both a stout defense of the settlement and a spear that was about to crack open Cree formations. Poundmaker's failed attempts at a crossing left his own units weak, which is when the Rough Rider struck, decisively defeating the Cree in the Battle of Echu, as American and Aztec forces converged to encircle the Cree's crown jewel. Don't be fooled. This alliance was only one of convenience, as both armies knew that whoever would control this city would control the balance of power across the continent. Both armies made a desperate push, And after the smoke cleared, it was the superior technology of the Americans that won the day, breaking Kree power forever. But where one power falls, another rises. America's status as a peer rival of the Aztec hegemon could no longer be ignored. And with the Americans' massive industrial power base back home, it was obvious which way the winds were turning. Time was running out as Montezuma had one final chance to crush the upstart power, although he wouldn't do it alone. The entire continent came together to back the Liberation Decree. All cities not part of the American Core 4 would be released and transferred to the Aztecs for safekeeping. If they accepted, then American dreams of glory would be destroyed, a fate they couldn't accept. In response, the entire continent declared war. Trade routes were cut off overnight, and American coffers lay empty. Their entire empire began collapsing like a house of cards. Facing a world united against him, the Rough Rider saddled up for one last ride. As unenviable as the situation was, there was still hope. America was now stronger. From humble beginnings, they had carved out a place amongst the world's most powerful nations. But are they strong enough to face the entire world on their own? For any chance of victory, they needed to hold back the Aztecs before their allies could mobilize. To win the war, they needed to find a way to recover their economy, so expeditions were sent to discover any Mayan or Aztec rivals in Southern America to replace broken trade routes. Though the front line stayed still, the Aztecs adapted Kree tactics, using chaos and confusion to weaken American forces. The difference was that their armored knights were strong enough to hold their own in a fight. This further destruction of the teetering economy was not looking good, as the war of attrition favors the side still not at full strength. America needed a win, and they finally got one. The beleaguered poundmakers still dealing with Montezuma quickly signed a separate peace recognizing all American gains. And the good news didn't stop there, as Simon Bolivar, rival of the Mayans, was all too willing to finance their fight against his enemy. With this cash injection, American forces could be equipped with the best of the best. Teddy the Rough Rider now had an army to back him up. Newly recruited Rough Riders blitzed the knights pillaging the countryside and eviscerated them. A turning point that would take the fight to the Aztec territory where the last city on this side of the mountain range finally surrendered, opening the way to the Mesoamerican power base. In response, Montezuma made a desperate move and met the Americans in the open plains for a decisive battle. And while their knights were as powerful as ever, they were still no match for America's finest. Soon after, the city of Texas Coco, now shortened to Texas, fell to the Americans. America may have had the initiative, but this war was far from over, as two more fronts were about to open up. The Mayans were reinforcing what remained of the Aztec army, as Canada was near the end of their own mobilization process. To counter this, the plan called for the bulk of the army to head south, while a lone rider would engage in Kree-like activities north of the border. Little did anyone know that this lone unit would rewrite history. To truly end this coalition, its leading member had to be forced to capitulate. There were two directions the Americans could invade from: west or south. The problem was that whichever decision they took, they opened themselves up to flanking maneuvers from the other side. While the question on how to deal with this conundrum was pondered, the Lone Rider was about to make a discovery. Canada had no army. This realization allowed the raiders to go wild, pillaging everything they could and slowing down Canada's mobilization process. Eventually, the Southern Front would see the same success when they made their own groundbreaking discovery, the Gatling gun. This automatic gun was used to pin down the Mesoamerican armies while the bulk of America's forces moved north to take the lightly defended West Coast. And while this hammer was striking, another was about to drop. After pillaging everything the countryside had to offer, there was only one place left to plunder. But after just a small probing attack, the Lone Rider realized that Canada was weak. And so the probe turns into a skirmish, which turns into a full frontal assault, taking Quebec City. And it wasn't just Quebec. Soon enough, the Lone Rider would single-handedly conquer the longest-standing thorn in America's side. For their bravery, they would be bestowed the highest honor known to humankind, and forever immortalized as heroes of America. With defeat on both fronts, the coalition had no choice but to sue for peace, and the war ended just as it began, with America capturing a rebel Cree city. The Americans, fueled by grit and forged by war, now stood at the top as the sole hegemon of North America.